My office always seemed like a fortress to me. The solid oak desk, the whiskey-colored leather armchairs, and the mahogany bookcases created a sense of firmness and permanence. It was here, amidst the smell of expensive leather and old books, that I made the most important decisions of my life. Tonight was no exception. The clock on the wall showed the beginning of 11. Outside the window, the lights of downtown Dallas painted a familiar picture of the city at night. I loosened my tie and looked at the latest ratings for the umpteenth time. The numbers were encouraging. 58% of the voters were ready to cast their votes for me. 18 years of an impeccable career as a lawyer and then a politician had done the trick. Bradford Hollingsworth was a man to be trusted. My phone vibrated. A message from Ethan Foster, head of the campaign office. Meeting with the teachers' union reps tomorrow at 9. Don't be late, Brad. I grinned. Ethan, despite his 38 years, sometimes acted like a nurturing hen. However, it was his pedantry and attention to detail that made him indispensable to my team. I reached for the water carafe when the phone rang again. This time, it was Vivian. Honey, will you be home for dinner tonight? Her voice sounded unusually animated. I'm already getting ready. Why? Oh, nothing much. Just stopped by that French restaurant you like. Got your favorite steak. Something in her voice made me wary. Vivian had never been particularly attentive to little things like that. In 18 years of marriage, I'd gotten used to my wife being more preoccupied with her charitable foundation and social events than with the comforts of home. Did you go to the restaurant yourself? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Brad, don't get me started. A familiar note of irritation appeared in her voice. You know I was at a meeting of the Foundation's Board of Trustees. The restaurant's just down the road. I glanced at my watch. The Board of Trustees meetings always ended at 6. It was almost 11 now. Of course, darling. I'll be there in half an hour. Hanging up the phone, I stared out at the nighttime city for a while. Vivian, my impeccable wife from the Montgomery family. When we met, she was a rising star philanthropist, and I was a hopeful lawyer. Her father, old Gerald Montgomery, was against our marriage at first. Political ambition is fine, young man, but the Montgomery family is accustomed to a certain level of stability, he told me at the time. Now, 18 years later, I was exactly what I wanted to be. A successful politician, a leading candidate for mayor of Dallas, a man with an impeccable reputation. Vivian was always there for me, the perfect politician's wife. Beautiful, educated, with impeccable manners and the right connections. Her charitable foundation helped children with developmental disabilities, and that added to my voting record. But over the last few months, something's changed. Barely perceptible details that I started to notice. New jewelry, the origins of which she was vague about. Increased Board of Trustees meetings. Strange pauses in conversations on the phone when I called out of the blue. I stood up and walked to the window. My office was on the 32nd floor, and from here I could see the entire downtown Dallas business district. Somewhere out there, among those lights, my wife had spent the last 5 hours. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't at a Board of Trustees meeting. The phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Laura, my assistant. Mr. Hollingsworth, interview tomorrow at 14:00 for the Dallas Morning News. Topic, your social housing development program. I sighed. The election race was heating up, and every day was packed to the minute. Lawrence Kingsley, my main rival, had already launched an active campaign to discredit my program. His latest statement that my plans were economically unviable demanded a response. Picking up papers from my desk, I noticed a photograph taken at last year's charity ball. Vivian and I looked like the perfect couple, she in a dark blue Vera Wang evening gown, me in a classic tuxedo. Her hand on my elbow, the perfect smile she'd honed over years of socializing. You're just being paranoid, Brad, I said to myself. You've got an election coming up, and you're making up problems where there aren't any. Walking down to the parking lot, I got into my black Lexus. Tom, my driver, wasn't needed today. Lately, I preferred to drive myself. It gave me a chance to be alone with myself and collect my thoughts. On the way home, I turned on the news. The announcer's voice was reporting on the latest events in the city. Problems with the financing of the new subway line, a strike by utility workers, and the weather forecast for tomorrow. The usual big city news background. Our house in Highland Park greeted me with glowing windows. 3 stories of Georgian style, an immaculate lawn worked on by Pete the gardener, and a 4-car garage all spoke of a well-established, prosperous life. Once parked, I sat in the car for a few seconds, collecting my thoughts. I needed to pay attention, notice details, not ask direct questions. Vivian met me in the lobby. She was wearing a dark green dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless. Too flawless for someone who was just traveling to a board of trustees meeting and a restaurant. "Honey, you're just in time." She reached up to kiss my cheek. "You look lovely," I said as I made my way to the dining room. "New dress?" "Oh, this?" She ran her hand carelessly over the fabric. "Bought it last week. You know we have a foundation reception coming up. Need to look appropriate." I nodded, noting to myself that this was the first time I'd ever heard of a foundation reception. The table was set impeccably. Crystal, silver, candles, and antique candlesticks that Vivian had gotten from her grandmother. My favorite steak was indeed from Le Petit Bistro, but I noticed that the table was set with only one. "Aren't you going to have dinner?" I asked, sitting down at the table. "Oh, I already ate at the restaurant. You know, was so hungry after all those discussions." She waved her hand and sat across from me, watching me cut the steak. I looked at her perfect manicure, her new dress, her impeccable styling. At the clock showing almost 11 p.m., at the lone appliance on the table, and something inside clenched with an unpleasant foreboding. "How was the meeting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice sounding casual. "Oh, the usual. We discussed a new program for kids with autism. You know, sometimes Margaret can be just insufferable with her ideas." I listened to her recount the details of the meeting, which I was pretty sure hadn't happened, and thought about calling Dexter McCormick tomorrow. That private investigator had already helped me with several sensitive political investigations. Perhaps it was time to utilize his services for personal use. "Brad? Are you listening to me?" Vivian's voice brought me back to reality. "Of course I am, darling. Just a little tired. Big day tomorrow. Meeting with the teachers' union, an interview." "You need more rest." She stood up and walked over to me, putting her hands on my shoulders. "This election race is making you too stressed out. You've even gotten suspicious." I felt her fingers tighten lightly on my shoulders. "You're just jealous," she said with a light chuckle, and I felt the phrase echoed inside with an unpleasant chill. As if I could have time for anything but the foundation and your campaign. I remained silent, continuing to methodically cut the steak. A car drove by outside the window, illuminating the dining room with its headlights for a moment. In that light, I noticed a faint mark on Vivian's neck, as if someone had squeezed the chain of her necklace too hard. A necklace she wasn't wearing right now. The morning began as usual. I woke up at 6:30, half an hour before my alarm clock rang. It had become a habit since my days at the law firm to wake up early so I could review the morning news and prepare for the day ahead. Vivian was asleep with her back turned to me, her breathing even and calm. I quietly got out of bed, trying not to wake her, and headed for the bathroom. My morning rituals had been honed over the years. 10 minutes to shower, 5 to shave, 3 to style my hair. The gray on my temples, which I'd noticed a year ago, had become more prominent, but Ethan assured me it added to my solidity in the eyes of the voters. As I was tying my tie, I heard Vivian talking on the phone in the bedroom. Her voice was muffled, almost a whisper. It was strange. She usually never got up this early. I froze, listening. "No, it's not going to work out today. Yeah, I understand, but he has an important meeting with the union. Okay, same time tomorrow." When I came out of the bathroom, she was already in bed, pretending to have just woken up. "Good morning, darling." Her smile was serene. "You're up early today." "Who were you talking to?" I asked, buttoning the cufflinks on my shirt. "What?" "Oh, it's Jessica from the foundation. Some paperwork issues for a new project." Jessica. I knew everyone at the Vivian Foundation, but I didn't recall any Jessica. I didn't pursue the subject further, though. "Don't forget dinner with Kingsley tonight." Vivian reminded me, stretching. 7 o'clock at Morton's, I nodded. Lawrence Kingsley, my chief election rival, had proposed this meeting ostensibly to discuss ethical campaigning. Whatever that meant, I couldn't refuse. The press had already gotten wind of the upcoming dinner. When I went down to the kitchen, I found that Mrs. Parker, our housekeeper, had already prepared breakfast. Scrambled eggs and bacon, freshly squeezed orange juice, toast, just the way I like it. Unfolding the iPad, I looked at the morning news. Nothing much. Another city council scandal, school funding problems, weather report. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement by the pool. Through the panoramic kitchen windows, I could see Pete, our gardener, picking up fallen leaves. He'd been working for us for 15 years and knew everything that went on around the house. It might be worth talking to him. "Mr. Hollingsworth," Mrs. Parker's voice interrupted my musings. "There's a Mr. Foster on the phone for you." I picked up the phone. Ethan was in his repertoire, speaking quickly, clearly to the point. "Brad, we have a problem with the union. They want to discuss your old case from '97, when you represented a construction company against the builders' union." "That was over 20 years ago, Ethan." "I know, but Kingsley somehow dug up that case. We need to get ready." I glanced at my watch. The meeting was less than 2 hours away. "Okay, I'll be in the office in 30 minutes. As I was finishing breakfast, Vivian came down to the kitchen. She was wearing a tracksuit, looked like she was going to yoga. "Don't stay out late tonight," she said, pouring herself a smoothie. "Dinner with Kingsley is important to your campaign." Something in her tone made me wary. Vivian didn't usually show this much interest in my political affairs. "Do you know Kingsley well?" I asked, as if by the way. She froze for a moment, but then laughed casually. "Brad? What kind of question is that?" "Sure, we've met at various events, as we do with everyone in our circle." I watched as she stirred her smoothie. Perfect movements, not a single unnecessary gesture. Vivian had always been like that, flawless in everything. Too flawless. "By the way, I'm going to be late after yoga today." She looked at me with her clear green eyes. "Gotta stop by the foundation to sort out some paperwork." "The ones Jessica called about?" "Yeah, and the others too." On my way out of the house, I ran into Pete. He was just finishing up with the leaves and gathering his tools. "Good morning, Mr. Hollingsworth," he said hello, wiping his hands on his work coveralls. "Beautiful weather today." "Yes, Pete, lovely indeed. Say," I paused, "have you noticed anything unusual lately?" The old gardener looked at me carefully, then cast a quick glance at the second-story windows. "Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. Although," he faltered, "I've been seeing the same car parked on the corner a lot the last couple weeks. A dark BMW. But maybe it's just a coincidence." I nodded, making a mental note to verify that information. The office greeted me with the usual bustle. Laura, my assistant, had already prepared all the paperwork for the '97 case. Ethan paced nervously around the office. "Here, take a look at this." He held out a folder to me. "Kingsley is clearly up to something. These requests to the archives, the meetings with former union members." I leafed through the documents, but my thoughts were far away. Vivian's face was in front of me when I'd asked about Kingsley. That second's pause before answering. "Brad? Are you listening to me?" "Yes, Ethan, go ahead." The day flew by like a blur. The meeting with the union went relatively smoothly. My legal background did come up, but I was able to explain my position convincingly. The interview for the Dallas Morning News also went off without a hitch, but my inner restlessness persisted. At 6:30, I was already at Morton's. I ordered a whiskey and waited. Vivian was late, which wasn't like her. Kingsley showed up exactly at 7, impeccably dressed as always in a Tom Ford suit. "Bradford," he extended his hand for a handshake. "Good to see you." "Likewise, Lawrence." We exchanged pleasantries, discussing the weather and the latest city news. Finally, Vivian appeared, slightly out of breath. "Sorry I'm late." She kissed me on the cheek and, for a moment, I noticed Kingsley's hand tremble as she greeted him. The dinner passed in a strange atmosphere. Kingsley was unusually gracious, and Vivian talked and laughed a lot. perhaps too much. I watched them in silence, noting every look, every gesture. When the waiter brought the bill, Kingsley insisted on paying. "That was my night," he said with a smile that seemed a little too smug. In the car on the way home, Vivian was unaccustomedly silent. "It was a nice evening," she finally said. "Kingsley turned out to be quite a nice man." "Yeah?" I tried to keep my tone calm. "How long have you noticed that?" She turned to me, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "Brad, don't get me started. You're just jealous and it's ridiculous." That phrase again. At home, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the city at night. Then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number. "Dexter, it's Bradford Hollingsworth. We need to meet. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in my office. I have a job for you." As I hung up the phone, I heard the front door slam. I looked at the clock, almost midnight. From the office window, I could see Vivian get out of the cab. She said she was on her way to a friend's house to discuss some charity event. But why a cab? She has a private driver. As I watched her walk toward the house, my insides clenched with a premonition of something imminent. Something told me that seeing Dexter would be the point of no return. Dexter McCormick showed up at my office at 8 o'clock sharp. He hadn't changed since the last time I'd seen him. The same worn leather jacket, the same scrutinizing gaze, and the habit of tapping his fingers on his knee as he talked. I'd specifically asked Laura not to let anyone in for an hour and to turn off the phones. "So, Mr. Hollingsworth," Dexter pulled out a tattered notebook. "What is it this time? Political opponents again?" I shook my head, walking over to the window. Morning Dallas spread out below, businesslike and indifferent to other people's problems. "No, Dexter, this is personal." He nodded understandingly, showing neither surprise nor curiosity. That was why I appreciated him for that. Absolute professionalism. "Mrs. Hollingsworth?" he asked after a pause. "Yes. I need to know everything. Where she goes, who she meets, every call, every appointment." Dexter jotted something down in his notebook. "What grounds for suspicion?" I told him about the strange phone calls, the unexplained delays, the new jewelry, about the dark BMW Pete had spotted, about last night's dinner with Kingsley. "So you suspect Mr. Kingsley?" Dexter continued to take notes. "Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's paranoia, but something's going on, Dexter, and I need to know what." He closed the notebook and looked at me carefully. "You realize that in your position, any scandal? That's why I need absolute confidentiality, and that's why I've come to you." After the detective left, I sat at the table for a long time, looking at the picture from last year's charity ball. Vivian was smiling at the camera, her hand resting on my shoulder. Who would have thought that a year later I'd be hiring a private investigator to follow her? Ethan's call snapped me out of my musings. "Brad, we have a problem with tonight's show. The channel wants to change the format, not just your speech, but a debate with Kingsley." I felt my insides clench. When did they decide that? Just now. Kingsley supposedly suggested it himself. Of course he suggested it. After dinner last night, the day dragged on endlessly. Meetings, calls, debate prep. I checked my phone every 15 minutes, waiting for messages from Dexter, but he was silent. Around 3, Vivian called. "Honey, I won't be able to watch your debate tonight. We have an urgent meeting at the foundation." "Urgent? Why so sudden?" "Oh, it's all these new rules for charities. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to be redone right away." I heard some noise in the background, similar to airport announcements. But I didn't bother to ask. "Sure thing, honey. Good luck at the meeting." Hanging up the phone, I dialed Dexter's number. He answered after the first beep. "Mrs. Hollingsworth just left the foundation building. She's on her way to the airport." "Alone?" "No. There's a man with her, tall, about 50. Gray suit, dark hair with streaks. They got into the same BMW your gardener saw." "Kingsley?" "No, the description doesn't fit." "Then who does?" "Keep watching. Keep me posted." The debate started at 7. I sat in the dressing room trying to concentrate on my prepared talking points, but my thoughts kept returning to Vivian. What is she doing at the airport? Where is she going? With whom? 2 minutes to air. The assistant peeked in. Lawrence Kingsley was already waiting in the studio. Impeccable suit, confident smile. Did he know something? Or was it just a coincidence that he'd offered to host the debate tonight? Good evening, Bradford. He extended his hand. I hope you're ready for a serious conversation. I shook the outstretched hand, noting to myself that it was the first time he had called me by my first name. The debate passed like a blur. I answered questions, parried Kingsley's attacks, talked about my city development program. It was business as usual, but there was an emptiness inside. The phone in my pocket was silent. No news from Dexter. After the broadcast, Kingsley tried to strike up a conversation. That was a great discussion. Why don't we have a glass of wine? Let's discuss some points. Some other time, Lawrence. I have business to attend to. Leaving the studio, I immediately dialed Dexter. They took a private flight to Houston. I've sent my man to follow. No news yet. Houston. What was she doing in Houston? The house was empty and quiet. Mrs. Parker had already left, leaving dinner in the oven. I didn't eat, instead pouring myself a whiskey and going upstairs to the bedroom. Vivian's dressing room was perfectly organized. Suits and dresses by color, shoes in special boxes, jewelry in a safe. I'd never been interested in her things, but now every detail seemed like a clue. New dresses. Where did they come from? I didn't remember her talking about shopping. Several pairs of Christian Louboutin shoes. When had she bought them? On the shelf, a bottle of an unfamiliar perfume, not the kind I'd given her, and not the kind she usually used. My phone vibrates. A message from Dexter. They're staying at the Four Seasons, booked a single room. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the room start to spin. One room. Of course it was one. What did I expect? A door slammed downstairs. I glanced at the clock, almost midnight. Quick footsteps on the stairs, heels clacking on the hardwood floor. Brad? Are you awake? Vivian stood in the bedroom doorway, flawless as always. Not a trace of fatigue after the emergency meeting. How was the debate? I watched the tape in the cab. Fine. I tried to keep my voice steady. How was the meeting? Oh, it was tedious. So much paperwork. I looked at her and saw a stranger. The woman who'd been my wife for 18 years, but now stood in front of me and calmly lied. Where's your BMW? I asked suddenly. She froze for a second. What BMW? The one you drove to the airport. A pause. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly pulled herself together. Brad, what are you talking about? I took a cab. Of course you did, honey. I finished my whiskey. You always take a cab. You're just jealous. She reached over and tried to stroke my shoulder. This campaigning is making you paranoid. I intercepted her hand. There was a mark on her wrist, a barely noticeable bruise, as if someone had squeezed too hard. What's that? Hit the door at the office. She gently released her hand. You know how clumsy I am. No, I don't. In 18 years of marriage, I've never once seen Vivian Hollingsworth be clumsy. The phone vibrated again. A message from Dexter. Got a picture. I'll send it in the morning. Who texts this late? Vivian asked, unbuttoning her jacket. Ethan, discussing tomorrow's performance. She nodded and disappeared into the bathroom. I could hear the water rushing, her humming something to herself. So calm, so confident. And I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about how the morning could change my whole life. I'd been up all night. I lay listening to Vivian's steady breathing and counted the hours until dawn. Every time she moved slightly in her sleep, I winced, expecting her to say someone's name. But she was silent, so calm, so serene. At 5 a.m, I couldn't stand it and got up. I went down to the kitchen, where the light was still on. Mrs. Parker was coming in at 7. I put on the coffee maker and took out a cup. My hands trembled slightly, and I scattered the coffee on the countertop. The black beans rolled across the white marble like dots at the end of an unwritten sentence. My cell phone lay nearby. I checked it every few minutes, waiting for a message from Dexter. The promised pictures kept not coming, and the waiting was driving me crazy. It was starting to get light outside the window. I watched the first rays of sunlight color the sky pink, and I thought about how many sunrises like this we'd had with Vivian. 18 years is 6,570 dawns. I wonder at what point she began to meet them with thoughts of another. Honey? You're so early. Her voice made me wince. Vivian stood in the kitchen doorway wrapped in a silk robe. Her hair was slightly disheveled from sleep, but even so, she looked flawless. Didn't sleep. I turned my back to the coffee maker. Want some coffee? No, thanks. I have an early meeting today, gotta get ready. A meeting. Of course. She always has some kind of meeting. At the foundation? Yeah, and I also have to stop by my mom's. She called yesterday asking for help with some paperwork. I didn't say anything. Her mother had been in Paris yesterday. I knew that for a fact because Gerald, Vivian's father, had complained about it at lunch 2 days ago. The phone vibrated. A message from Dexter. Check your email. I got a shower. Vivian stretched like a cat. Don't forget, there's a fundraiser at the art museum tonight. You promised to be there. I nodded, unable to utter a word. I waited for her to go upstairs and open the mail with shaky hands. The pictures were crisp, professional. Vivian steps out of a BMW. A tall man opens the hotel door in front of her, his arm around her waist, a careless, familiar gesture. They are in the lobby of the Four Seasons. She laughs, looking up at him from below. And the last photo, they enter the elevator, his lips at her temple. The man didn't look like Kingsley. I'd never seen him before, but something about his appearance seemed vaguely familiar. The sallow face, the expensive suit, the confident movements of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Suddenly, I felt nauseous. I barely had time to run to the nearest bathroom. When the attack passed, I took a long look at myself in the mirror. Reddened eyes, gray on my temples, wrinkles that weren't there a year ago. Who is that man in the reflection? Could it be me? Bradford Hollingsworth? A respected politician? The 5-minute less mayor of Dallas? A cuckold? Brad? Are you all right? Vivian's voice from behind the door made me wince. Yeah, I'm fine. Must have eaten something. You've been kind of pale the last few days. Why don't you go see Dr. Anderson? The concern in her voice seemed genuine. How does she do that? How can she stand there, outside the door, feigning concern when she was in another man's arms a few hours ago? I'm fine, my voice sounded hoarse. Just tired. You've been working too hard, she mused. Why don't we take the weekend, go somewhere? Just you and me? I felt the nausea coming up to my throat again. Just you and me. How ironic. We'll see. Now's not a good time, the election's coming up. Of course, darling. Whatever you say. I heard her go upstairs, the bedroom door opening and closing. A few minutes later, the shower rumbled. Back in the kitchen, I opened the pictures again. Something about the man's face kept me awake. Where could I have seen him? The ringing of the phone made me jump. Ethan. Brad, we have a problem. Someone's digging up your 2,000-year-old case, the one with the land parcels. I barely listened. I had pictures in front of me. Vivian laughing, looking at a stranger, his arm around her waist. Brad? Can you hear me? Yes, Ethan, get on with it. But just get on with it. I hardly ever raised my voice. Ethan fell silent, clearly shocked. I'm sorry. I rubbed my temples. Not feeling very well. Let's discuss this later. Hanging up the phone, I heard Vivian coming down the stairs. The clack of her heels on the marble steps echoed in my temples like hammer blows. She appeared in the kitchen, impeccable Chanel suit, pearl necklace, light makeup. I'll go. She reached up to kiss my cheek. Don't forget about tonight. I'll stop by the house to change and we'll ride together. I watched her walk toward the garage, every movement calibrated, every gesture honed by years of socializing. My perfect wife, a stranger's woman. When the sound of her car faded into the distance, I dialed Dexter's number. Do you know who he is? Not yet, but there's something interesting. He flew in from New York, a private jet registered to Preston Investments. Preston Investments. Something moved in the memory. Send me everything you can find on this company. I arrived at the office at 9 o'clock. Laura met me with a concerned look. Mr. Hollingsworth, are you feeling well? Should we cancel this morning's meetings? I shook my head and locked myself in my office. I opened my laptop, typed Preston Investments into the search engine. Lots of articles, financial reports, pictures, and then I realized why the face looked familiar. Garrett Preston, owner and CEO of Preston Investments, was on the cover of Forbes 2 months ago. Wall Street's financial genius, the headline read. I opened the article, scrolled down to the photo. Yes, that's him. The man in Dexter's photo. Garrett Preston, 52 years old, divorced, $2.5 billion. Suddenly, I remember a conversation from 2 months ago. Vivian had mentioned that the foundation had received a large donation from some investment company in New York. I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. Now everything was coming together. The donation, the business meetings, the trips to Houston. The phone vibrated. A message from Vivian. Don't forget 7 o'clock. Wear a dark blue tuxedo. It looks best in the pictures. She's thinking about how we'll look in the pictures. Of course she is. The perfect couple, the model family, the leading candidate for mayor and his flawless wife. And in a few days, she'll go to Houston again. Or New York. Or anywhere else where Garrett Preston will be waiting for her. The evening at the art museum was like exquisite torture. I stood next to Vivian, smiling at the photographers, shaking hands, saying all the right words about supporting the arts and the importance of cultural heritage. And inside, everything was burning with impotent rage and humiliation. Vivian was gorgeous in a deep emerald-colored Carolina Herrera dress. It must have cost a fortune. I wondered if it was a gift from Preston, too. I caught myself scrutinizing every detail of her outfit, trying to find traces of someone else's presence in our lives. Bradford, darling! Margaret Ashton, chairman of the museum's board of trustees, floated over to us with a glass of champagne. Vivian was just telling me about your plans to develop cultural programs. That's just wonderful. I looked at my wife. She was smiling her trademark socialite smile, the slightly raised corners of her lips, the slight tilt of her head. In 18 years, I'd learned all her smiles. This was the one she used when she needed to charm the right people. Yes, culture is an important part of our program. My voice sounded smooth, professional. Years of political career had taught me to hide my true emotions. Oh, I'm sure you'll make a fine mayor. Margaret lowered her voice. Between you and me, Lawrence Kingsley was here an hour ago, so uncouth, doesn't understand art at all. Vivian tensed slightly at the mention of Kingsley. I felt her hand on my elbow tremble slightly. I wonder if she's really sleeping with Preston, or if Kingsley is also on her list of hobbies. Honey, Vivian gently pulled me to the side. We need to say hello to the Richardsons. They're big donors to your campaign. We maneuvered between guests, stopping for brief conversations and photos. I was mechanically performing all the rituals of social life, and the pictures from the 4 seasons were rolling around in my head. His hand on her waist. Her laughter directed toward him. Their shared room. Mr. Hollingsworth, a young reporter from the local paper, blocked our way. May I have a moment? Just a couple of questions about your position on funding cultural projects. Sure, I smiled my campaign smile. Vivian, dear, you go have a chat with the Richardsons in the meantime. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched her pull out her phone, barely moving away from me. A quick glance at the screen, a slight smile. Who is she texting? Preston? Or does she have someone else in mind? And how do you plan on allocating the budget? The reporter's voice brought me back to reality. I started talking about programs to support young artists, renovating historic buildings and creating new exhibition spaces. All these plans we had discussed with the team many times. I could talk about them in my sleep. The phone in my pocket vibrated. A message from Dexter. Got an update on Preston. He's in town, staying at the Ritz-Carlton. I looked across the hall at Vivian. She was chatting animatedly with the Richardson couple, but her fingers kept rubbing the phone, waiting for a message, planning a meeting. Excuse me, I interrupted the reporter. I have an important call to make. The staff restroom was quiet and empty. I dialed Dexter's number. What else did you find out? He flew in this afternoon, booked a room for 3 days, and something else interesting. He met with Kingsley 2 hours ago. I felt the nausea coming up my throat again. Preston and Kingsley. What did that mean? A political conspiracy or just a coincidence? Keep an eye on them. All of them. Back in the hall, I saw Vivian talking on the phone in the far corner. She was standing half-turned, covering her mouth with her hand, a gesture I hadn't noticed before. Ah, Bradford, The voice of Gerald Montgomery, my father-in-law, made me wince. "Great evening, isn't it?" I looked at him, tall, personable, with that special posture that money and impeccable upbringing give you. I wondered if he knew. Guesses his impeccable daughter. Yeah, great. I poured myself a whiskey. Third one of the evening, but who's counting? Vivian just shines tonight. Gerald looked at his daughter with fatherly pride. You know, I always told Elizabeth she'd be an ornament to any society. I took a big gulp. The whiskey burned my throat, but it was even pleasant. At least some real feeling in the midst of this farce. By the way, Gerald lowered his voice, have you heard about her foundation's new sponsor? Preston Investments, a very serious company. The glass in my hand nearly cracked from the strain. Yeah, heard something. Garrett Preston is an amazing man. We met last month at a charity event in New York. He was very interested in Vivian's work. I imagined how interested he was. The pictures from the Four Seasons flashed before my eyes again. Excuse me. I set my glass down. I need to talk to some potential sponsors. For the rest of the evening, I watched Vivian like a predator watching its prey. She fluttered from group to group, charming everyone with her smile and impeccable manners. She checked her cell phone several times. Twice she went out to powder her nose, both times for 15 minutes. Around 11 o'clock she came up to me. Honey, why don't we go home? You look tired. In the car she was silent, looking out the window. I drove, trying to focus on the road, but my thoughts were jumbled. The whiskey was fogging my mind, or maybe it wasn't just the alcohol. Big day tomorrow, she finally said. You need to get some sleep. You have a big day tomorrow too? I couldn't hold back the sarcasm. She turned to me. What do you mean? Nothing. Just asking. Brad. Her voice became sterner. What's been going on with you lately? You're not yourself. Really? I braked sharply at a stoplight. What am I supposed to be like, Vivian? You're just jealous. She shook her head. Like a teenager. It's unworthy of a man of your stature. I remained silent. We reached the house in heavy silence. In the bedroom, Vivian took a long time to remove her makeup, performing her usual evening ritual. I watched as she methodically cleansed her face, applied cream, brushed her hair, movements I'd seen 1,000 times before. When had she managed to become such a stranger? My phone vibrated quietly. A message from Dexter. Preston made a reservation for 2 at La Maison tomorrow night at 8. La Maison is a French restaurant an hour outside of the city, a secluded place for those who don't want to be seen. Are you staying late at the foundation tomorrow? I asked, as if by the way. Vivian froze in front of the mirror for a moment. Yes, a lot of work. Don't expect me for dinner. Of course. Lots of work, at La Maison. I lay in bed, feeling everything inside clench with rage and pain. Next to me, Vivian was reading some document from a tablet. In the light of the bedside lamp, I could see her profile perfect, like an antique cameo. My wife, a stranger's woman, a liar. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, I'll know for sure. And then what? Divorce? Scandal? Political career collapse? I closed my eyes, but the pictures from the Four Seasons kept flashing before my mind. Her laughter, his arm around her waist, their shared room. Good night, darling. Vivian turned off the light. The morning began with a headache. Whiskey mixed with sleeping pills had turned out to be a bad idea. I barely cracked my eyes open and looked at the clock. 7:30. The bed next to me was empty, but it still held Vivian's warmth. The sound of water and her voice came from the bathroom. She was on the phone again. I listened, but only heard scraps of phrases. Yes, of course. No, he doesn't know. 8 o'clock, as agreed. I staggered to the guest bathroom and stood under the cold shower for a long time, trying to get my thoughts in order. It was going to be a busy day. 3 meetings with voters, an interview for local television, a meeting with the team. And at 8 o'clock at night, at 8 p.m., my wife would be having dinner with her lover at La Maison. Going down to the kitchen, I found Vivian eating breakfast. She looked serene in her silk robe, with perfect styling and makeup. Good morning, darling. She looked up from her iPad. You look awful. How much did you drink last night? I didn't count. I poured myself a cup of coffee. trying not to hold the cup with trembling hands. "You need to be more careful. The press is watching your every move." The concern in her voice sounded genuine. How does she do it? How can she sit here, giving me advice while planning a meeting with her lover? "What are your plans tonight?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Just a normal day. Meetings at the foundation, need to check the paperwork for a new project." She sipped her green smoothie. "Don't expect me for dinner, it'll be busy." I watched her spread avocado on whole wheat toast. Even in that simple movement, there was some honed elegance. For 18 years, I'd admired that elegance. Now it evoked only bitterness. "By the way," Vivian looked up, "don't forget, there's a reception at the Andersons on Saturday. We need to show everyone that we're the perfect couple?" I interrupted. She froze for a moment, then smiled. "Of course, darling. We are the perfect couple." In the office, Ethan was waiting for me with a pile of papers and a concerned look on his face. "Brad, we need to discuss the Kingsley situation. His recent statements about your past at the law firm." "Not now, Ethan." "But the ratings?" I said not now. Ethan backed away, clearly shocked by my tone. In all my years on the job, I'd never raised my voice at him. "I'm sorry." I rubbed my eyes. "It's just rough morning. Give me an hour." Left alone, I pulled out my phone and dialed Dexter's number. "Anything new?" "Preston spent the morning at the hotel. He has a meeting with some financial advisor at 11. The reservation at La Maison is confirmed." "And Kingsley?" "Quiet for now, but my sources say he's preparing some kind of dirt." "Of course he is. The only question is, does he know about Vivian and Preston? And if he does, why hasn't he used that information yet?" The day dragged on endlessly. I mechanically performed all the duties of a mayoral candidate, smiling, shaking hands, answering questions. Inside was empty and cold, as if someone had turned off all emotions, leaving only a deafening pain. At 3 o'clock, Vivian called. "Honey, I looked over your schedule for next week. You need to be sure to show up for the opening of the new school on Friday. It'll add to your points with the voters with the kids." I listened to her businesslike tone and thought about how she planned her meetings with Preston. Was it the same methodical way, with the same attention to detail? "Of course, dear. Whatever you say." "What's wrong with you?" There was irritation in her voice. "You've been kind of weird the last few days. Is it all the election stress?" "No, Vivian. It's not stress." "What is it then? Your jealousy again? Brad, this is getting ridiculous." I glanced at my watch. 4:30. In 3.5 hours, she'd be sitting at La Maison, across from Preston. "Yeah, I guess I'm just jealous." My voice sounded tired. "You need to get some rest. Why don't we take the weekend, go somewhere just the two of us? To Houston?" I couldn't hold back the sarcasm. A pause. I could almost see her tense up on the other end of the line. "What does Houston have to do with it?" "I was thinking about the spa in Austin." "Of course. I'm sorry. I have to go to a meeting." At 7 o'clock, I was sitting in my car near La Maison. Dexter had texted that Preston was already at the restaurant. I stared across the parking lot, waiting for Vivian's familiar Lexus to appear. My phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. "Urgent! Kingsley is preparing a press conference. Something about your old business." I ignored the message. Right now, I didn't care about Kingsley, the election, or press conferences. At 15 to 8, Vivian's Lexus pulled into the parking lot. She got out of the car, stunning in a dark blue dress I'd never seen before. She walked with a confident gait toward the restaurant entrance. I counted to 100, got out of the car, and followed her. The maitre d' tried to stop me, but I showed my city council ID. Inside the restaurant, it was semi-dark, and quiet music was playing. I saw them right away, a table in the far corner, candles, a bottle of wine. Preston was holding her hand, saying something quietly. Vivian was laughing, that special laugh that used to be reserved for me. I stood in the shadow of the column and watched my wife and her lover. At the way she tossed back her hair in a familiar gesture, the way she leaned closer to him, the way their fingers intertwined on the table. "Sir?" The maitre d' touched my shoulder. "Would you like a table?" I shook my head and walked out, I sat in the car for a long time, clutching the steering wheel. Then I pulled out my cell phone. Dexter, gather everything you have on Preston, every detail. Keep an eye on Kingsley. Something tells me these stories are connected. I got home around midnight. Vivian was still gone. I sat in the darkness of the study, drinking whiskey and thinking about what to do next. Divorce? A scandal? Now, a month before the election? The phone vibrated again. Ethan. Brad, we need to discuss the situation with Kingsley immediately. I looked at the screen and suddenly realized what needed to be done. The election. A career. Everything I've been working toward for the last 20 years. I couldn't let it crumble. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard the front door open. Vivian's light footsteps on the stairs, the rustle of her dress. Brad, are you awake? She stood in the study doorway, beautiful, slightly flushed from the wine. We need to talk, I said, taking a sip of whiskey. About what? About how we're going to get on with our lives, before the election and after. She froze, then slowly walked into the office. What do you mean? I know all about it, Vivian. About Preston, about Houston, about everything. I couldn't see her face in the darkness, just a silhouette against the window. Brad, no explanation needed. I saw you at La Maison today. She lowered herself into the chair across from me. For the first time ever, I saw her flawless mask tremble. And now what? Now we're going to live our lives as before, at least outwardly. The election is less than a month away. Afterward, we'll see. Are you suggesting we pretend? Isn't that what we've been doing for the last few months? She was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked over to the window. Okay, whatever you say. I finished my whiskey and stood up as well. One more thing, Vivian, be careful. Kingsley's cooking up something. Don't give him an excuse. She nodded, still looking out the window. Walking up to the bedroom, I thought about the fact that I had just made a deal with the devil. But did I really have a choice? A week passed. Vivian and I played our roles with impeccable precision. The perfect couple in public, polite strangers at home. Every morning began the same way. Breakfast together, small talk about the day's plans, careful avoidance of glances at each other. This morning I watched her prepare her invariable green smoothie. The movements are precise, measured. A pinch of chia seeds, a handful of spinach, half an avocado. So familiar and so foreign. New school opening today, she spoke without turning around. I ordered your favorite gray suit from the dry cleaners. It looks better on camera. Thanks. I sipped my coffee, watching the morning news on my tablet. What time do you need to be ready? The ceremony is at 11. I'll pick you up at the office at 10:30. The perfect politician's wife, always mindful of details, always concerned with image. I wonder if she plans her meetings with Preston as meticulously. After our conversation in the office, she's been more cautious. No more dinners at La Maison, no more trips to Houston. Dexter said they're meeting at a private home in the country. Smart, discreet. Are you listening to me? Vivian's voice snapped me out of my musings. I'm sorry, what did you say? I said there's a charity luncheon after school. We need to show up there for at least an hour. I nodded, watching her stir her smoothie, counterclockwise, always counterclockwise. Little rituals I knew by heart, which had once seemed cute, but now only caused deafening irritation. By the way, she finally turned to me. I looked at the latest rankings. You're up 3 points since that interview about family values. Of course I did. Everyone loves stories about strong families, about loyalty, about tradition. If only they knew. An excited Ethan was waiting for me in the office. Brad, we have a problem. Kingsley started hinting to the press about some dirt. What exactly? It's not clear yet, but his assistant mentioned at the bar that a bomb is about to go off. I looked out the window, a sunny October day, downtown Dallas shining with glass and metal. Somewhere out there, in one of those skyscrapers, Kingsley was plotting my political assassination. Find out everything you can. I pulled out my phone, dialing Dexter's number. Yes, Mr. Hollingsworth, there's news. Go ahead. Preston met with Kingsley last night. Private office at Morton's, 2 hours of conversation. I felt my back grow cold. Preston and Kingsley. Again. What did they talk about? I don't know, but Kingsley seemed very pleased after the meeting. At 10:30, as promised, Vivian showed up, immaculate in a cream Chanel suit with a string of pearls around her neck, a 15th wedding anniversary present. Ready? She gave me a professional look, adjusted my tie. The press is already at the school. You need to make a good impression. In the car, we were silent. Her driver, an elderly James who'd been with us for 10 years, habitually maneuvered through the morning traffic. By the way, Vivian was looking up something on her phone. Did you know that Preston Investments made a large donation to build a new wing of the school? I looked at her profile, not a shadow of embarrassment, complete calm. Really? How generous of them. Yes, Mr. Preston is a very generous man and understands the importance of education. I suppressed the urge to laugh. A generous man. Of course he is. The opening ceremony was perfect. I cut the ribbon, gave a speech about the importance of investing in our children's future, shook hands with the teachers. Vivian stood by my side, smiling at the photographers, holding my hand, the perfect politician's wife. Mr. Hollingsworth, a young journalist squeezed through the crowd. Is it true that Preston Investments provided a significant portion of the construction funds? I felt Vivian's hand on my elbow tense. Yes, it is. My voice sounded steady. We are grateful to all the sponsors who support the advancement of education in our town. And do you know Mr. Preston personally? Unfortunately, no. All matters of cooperation are handled by my wife's charitable foundation. Vivian smiled at the reporter. Mr. Preston is a very busy man, but his company does great things for our city. In the car on the way to the charity dinner, she finally spoke. It was dangerous. What was? Your tone, when talking about Preston. And what tone would you prefer? Maybe I should have told you how much I appreciated his generosity. She turned to me, fear flashing in her eyes. Not here, James. Of course not here, never here. Only in a private house outside of town, right? She turned pale. Are you following me? Did you think I was just going to sit back and pretend nothing was going on? We agreed. We agreed to keep up appearances, but that doesn't mean I have to be blind. James delicately turned up the volume on the radio. An old pro, he knew when to create the illusion of privacy. At the charity luncheon, we played our roles again. Vivian charmed the sponsors. I discussed the city's development plans. No one could suspect that an hour ago we'd nearly gone off on a screaming match in the car. Around 3, Dexter called. Mr. Hollingsworth, I have some information. Kingsley has scheduled a press conference for next week. Topic? Officially, it's to discuss campaign finance, but my sources say he's preparing something big. I looked across the room at Vivian. She was talking to a group of ladies from the board of trustees, laughing lightly, adjusting her pearl necklace with a familiar gesture. Learn all you can. Keep an eye on Preston. Something tells me he's involved in this. At home that evening, Vivian sat in her study for a long time. I could hear her talking to someone on the phone, a muffled voice, pauses, quiet laughter. In our bedroom, I noticed a new detail, a small gold brooch in the shape of a bird on her dressing table. I'd never seen it before. A gift? From him? Insomnia had become my usual state. I lay in the dark, listening to Vivian's steady breathing, and thought about how everything could fall apart at any moment. One phone call, one picture, one careless word, and it would all be over. The phone vibrated softly, a message from Ethan. Urgent. Kingsley rescheduled the press conference. It's now in 3 days. In the morning, it would start all over again. Breakfast together, smiles, the perfect couple in public. But something told me this performance wouldn't last. The storm was coming, and I could feel it with every fiber of my being. The morning started with Ethan's phone call. It was 6:30, and I'd just gotten out of the shower when the phone rang with an insistent trill. Brad, turn on the TV. Channel 5. There was something in his voice that made my insides chill. I grabbed the remote, not caring about the water droplets falling from my hair onto the expensive carpet. An exclusive interview with Garrett Preston, CEO of Preston Investments. The morning news anchor glowed with a professional smile. "Mr. Preston, tell us about your vision for the future of Dallas." I stared at the screen, unable to believe my eyes. Preston sat in the studio. Impeccable suit, confident posture, the easy smile of a man used to getting what he wanted. "You see, Sarah?" He spoke softly, with a slight New York accent. "I believe our city deserves honest leadership, transparency, integrity. Are you implying anything in particular? Let's just say I have information that could have a significant impact on the upcoming election." "Brad." Ethan's voice in the receiver trembled. "Do you realize what's going on?" I understood. Oh, how I understood. "Where's Vivian?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the screen. "What?" "My wife. Where is she?" "Ia. I don't know. Why?" I hung up the phone and walked quickly to the bedroom. The bed was empty, crumpled. On Vivian's pillow was a note written in her perfect handwriting. "Need to go to the foundation right away. Important papers. I'll see you tonight." Of course. Important papers. 6 a.m. I dialed Dexter's number. He answered after the first beep. "Have you seen her yet?" "Where is she?" "At the airport, private terminal. With him." I sat on the edge of the bed. "How long ago?" "Got here half an hour ago. Preston's plane is getting ready to leave." At that moment, a new face appeared on the TV screen. Lawrence Kingsley. "Yes, I'm aware of the information Mr. Preston is talking about." He radiated righteous indignation. "And I feel it is my duty to—" I turned off the television. The phone was bursting with calls and messages. Ethan, the press secretary, reporters. Going down to the kitchen, I found Mrs. Parker setting out the breakfast dishes. "Good morning, Mr. Hollingsworth." She studiously avoided my gaze. "Mrs. Hollingsworth asked me to tell you that—" "No need," I held up my hand. "Just get me some coffee, stronger." She nodded and turned away to the coffee maker. I stared at her hunched back and thought about how much she knew, how much she'd seen over the years. What has she guessed about? The phone rang again, this time Vivian's father. "Bradford." Gerald Montgomery's voice sounded tired. "I assume you've already seen the news?" "Yes." "Do you realize this is the end of your political career?" I remained silent. What was there to say? "Preston." Gerald sighed heavily. "He's not just my daughter's lover, he's her future husband." The cup fell out of my hands, shattering on the marble floor. Mrs. Parker flinched but didn't turn around. "What?" "They've been planning this for months. The divorce, the wedding. It was all supposed to happen after the election. But you started to suspect something and they decided—" "You knew?" My voice sounded foreign. "For the last 2 weeks, Vivian told her mother and she—" "And you kept quiet?" "Bradford," a steely note appeared in his voice. "You do realize the Montgomery family can't be implicated in a scandal, don't you? Preston has offered an elegant solution." "Elegant?" I laughed hoarsely. "Yes, very elegant. Ruining my career and reputation." "It's politics, son. Nothing personal." I hung up the phone and walked to the window. In the driveway, Pete was trimming the rose bushes as usual. Same as always, as if the world wasn't falling apart right now. The phone rang again. Vivian's number. I stared at the screen until the call stopped. A minute later, a message came through. "Sorry, it's what's best for everyone. You deserve someone who will truly love you." 18 years of marriage fit into one text message. The office was in chaos. Ethan was darting between desks, dispensing instructions, the phones ringing nonstop. "Brad!" He rushed toward me. "The press is besieging the building. Kingsley gave a press conference. Preston has provided evidence." "What evidence?" "Photographs, tapes of conversations. They've been preparing this for a long time. Also, there's documentation of financial fraud at your old law firm. Those same cases from '97. I looked out the window at the crowd of journalists at the entrance. Cameras, microphones, sensation-hungry faces. "Where's my phone?" Laura, my assistant, held out a new machine to me. "It's been ringing nonstop. CNN, Fox News, local channels." I took the phone and dialed Dexter's number. "The plane has taken off," he said without waiting for a question. "Destination New York." "Thanks." In my office, I poured myself a whiskey. On the desk was the morning paper, a picture of Vivian and me from the opening of school, the perfect couple, the model family. Mr. Hollingsworth, Ethan stood in the doorway. We need to prepare a statement. The press is demanding comment. What comments, Ethan? What can I say? Maybe deny it? Say it's a political provocation. Why? They have proof. They have everything. I walked to the window. Downstairs, the journalists continued to arrive. Soon it would be a real circus down here. My phone vibrated a message from an unknown number. Picture, Vivian and Preston on the airplane, her laughing, snuggling against his shoulder. The caption, I hope you realize, this isn't just personal, it's business. Kingsley is going to be a great mayor, LP. I stared at the picture until the screen went blank, then turned to Ethan. Call a press conference, in an hour. What are you going to say? The truth? I finished my whiskey. That my marriage is ruined, my career is over, and I'm withdrawing my candidacy from the election. But it's over, Ethan. The curtain is down. The play is over. He walked silently out. I was left alone in my office, looking out at the city below. The phone rang again, this time Kingsley's. Nothing personal, Bradford, just politics. I didn't answer. Just sat there, looking at the picture on the desk and thinking about how strangely life works. For 18 years, I'd lived with a woman who turned out to be a stranger, believed in a marriage that was a sham, built a career that collapsed overnight, and it all started with a simple phrase. You're just jealous. It's been a week, the longest week of my life. I sat in the study of my home, now former home, and methodically sorted through my papers. 18 years of married life were turning into neat stacks of documents, financial statements, contracts, photographs, letters. Mrs. Parker entered quietly with a cup of coffee. She had become even more taciturn in recent days, if that was even possible. Placing the cup on the table, she lingered for a moment. Mr. Hollingsworth, I was going to say, It's all right, Mary. I looked up from the papers. You don't have to say anything. She nodded and walked out. I knew she was quitting in 3 days. I could already see the statement in the stack of papers on the desk. Everyone was leaving the sinking ship. My phone vibrated a message from Ethan. Kingsley is leading in the polls by 20 points. Of course he is. After my press conference, after all the revelations, after the articles in all the papers, who would have thought that a story about a cheating husband could so effectively destroy a political career? The doorbell rang. I didn't move. I knew who it was. A minute later, Gerald Montgomery entered the office. He sat down in the chair opposite without waiting for an invitation. I continued to sort through the papers in silence. On the table in front of me was our wedding photo. Vivian in a white dress, a happy smile, my hands on her waist. How many lies were there already then? The lawyers have prepared all the paperwork. Gerald pulled a folder out of his briefcase. Vivian has agreed to your terms. The house, the cars, the bills, everything will be divided equally. How generous of her. Don't be sarcastic, Bradford. You realize it's what's best for everyone. I finally looked up. Better for everyone? Or better for the Montgomery family? For Preston? For Kingsley? It's business, nothing personal. Funny, I grinned. That's exactly what Preston wrote me that morning. Gerald sighed, pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, blotted his forehead. Listen, son, I'm not your son. My voice sounded harsher than I wanted it to. Not anymore. He was silent, looking at his perfectly polished shoes. Vivian asked me to tell you. Don't. I held up my hand. I don't want to hear anything. She's really sorry about the way things turned out. Really? And that's why she's giving an interview to the New York Times about how miserable her marriage to a controlling politician husband was. Gerald grumbled. It was Preston's PR team's idea. They had to create the right narrative. Narrative. I rolled the word on my tongue. A beautiful word for an outright lie. It was starting to rain outside the window. I watched the drops drip down the glass, blurring the outline of the garden where Pete was still pruning the roses. I wonder if he'll stay working here when the house is sold, or will he leave too, like everyone else? By the way, Gerald pulled out another envelope. Here's a check. Compensation for moral damages. I took the envelope without opening it and tore it in half. Tell your daughter and her fiancé. My silence is not for sale. Be reasonable, Bradford, that kind of money. Get out of my house. He stood up, pulling on his jacket. You're making a mistake. No, Gerald. The mistake I made 18 years ago was believing your daughter was capable of real feelings. After he left, I sat motionless for a long time, staring out at the rain. The phone rang on the desk, an unknown number. Brad? Vivian's voice, so familiar and so foreign. What do you need? I wanted to make sure you were okay. The papers say, I don't read the papers, especially the New York Times. A pause, then a quiet sigh. You realize I had to what, Vivian? Lie? Betray? Destroy my reputation? It wasn't me. It was all planned. Preston. Kingsley. What difference does it make? I felt a wave of bitterness rising. You were part of the plan. You knew what you were doing. Brad, you know what the funny thing is? I really did love you, all these years. Silence. Only the sound of rain outside the window. I loved you too, she finally said. In my own way. In your own way. I grinned bitterly. Of course you did. Like everything else in our marriage. In your way. Forgive me. No, Vivian. Some things can't be forgiven. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The rain had intensified, turning the garden into a blurry patch of green. Somewhere out there in New York, she's now sitting in Preston's penthouse, planning a wedding, giving interviews about toxic relationships and newfound freedom. The phone on the desk buzzed, a message from Ethan. All major sponsors have withdrawn their support. Associated Press wants an interview. What to do? I didn't answer. Instead, I took the wedding photo, stared at the smiling faces for a long time. Then I slowly tore it into small pieces. There was another knock at the door, this time by Mrs. Parker. Mr. Hollingsworth, the real estate people are here. They want to look at the house. Let them come tomorrow. But they're already here. I said tomorrow. She shut the door quietly. I poured myself a whiskey, an all too frequent gesture lately. A new email flashed on the computer screen. From Preston. Dear Bradford, I hope you don't hold a grudge against us. Business is business, politics is politics. Vivian deserves to be happy, and Dallas deserves a decent mayor. I hope you find the strength to move on. Best wishes, Garrett Preston P.S. We'll send the wedding invitation separately. I closed the letter without finishing it. It was ironic that the man who'd stolen my wife, ruined my career, dared to speak of dignity. It was getting dark in the office. I didn't turn on the light, just sat in the twilight, listening to the sound of the rain and thinking about how strange life was. A month ago, I was a successful politician, a respected man, a loving husband. Now, the phone rang again, this time Kingsley's number. Bradford, look, I know you're mad. I dropped the call. Then I turned the phone off, went to the window. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself, a gaunt face, graying temples, tired eyes. A man who had lost everything. No, not everything. There was something else left, dignity, and the memory of her saying, "You're just jealous." And I just loved. And I believed. I shut down my computer, put my papers in a folder. Tomorrow the realtors will be here, then the lawyers, then... Never mind. The only thing that mattered now was to save myself in this maelstrom of lies and betrayal. There was only one photo left on the table, the one from the charity event where Vivian and I had looked so happy. I took it, looked at the smiling faces once more, and threw it in the basket.